Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes. Today we're diving into a book that's as intricate and fascinating as its title suggests. Gödel, Escher, Bach, An Eternal Golden Braid,
GE.
affectionately known as GEB. Yeah.
It's one of those books that can leave you feeling like you've just completed a mental marathon,
Oh yeah,
but in the best way possible.
in the best way possible. It's not exactly light reading, but it's packed with thought-provoking ideas that connect seemingly disparate fields like mathematics, music, and even Zen Buddhism.
Yeah, it's really something.
What really struck me was how Hofstadter weaves these threads together to explore the big questions about consciousness, meaning,
And the nature of intelligence itself.
yeah, and how all of those things are kind of wrapped up together.
Absolutely. It's like he's created this grand tapestry where the patterns and connections only become clear as you step back and take in the whole picture.
It's a huge book, Dave.
It's a big one.
So, for our listeners who are ready to embark on this intellectual journey with us, let's start by unpacking some of the key themes of GE.
Okay.
We've got formal systems and their limitations, as revealed by Gödel's incompleteness theorem.
Right.
Then there's the mind-bending world of Escher's art.
With its paradoxes and visual illusions.
And of course, the intricate self-referential structures of Bach's music.
And running through all of this is the idea of recursion, of patterns within patterns.
Right.
And how these recursive structures seem to be fundamental to both the way our minds work and the way the universe is organized.
It's like those nested Russian dolls, where each one contains a smaller version of itself.
Exactly.
And this idea of recursion pops up everywhere in the book, from the structure of the dialogues themselves.
To the way Hofstadter explains complex concepts like self-reference and the emergence of meaning.
And what's so fascinating is that Hofstadter doesn't just present these ideas in a dry, academic way.
Right.
He uses dialogues, playful wordplay, even typographical tricks to engage the reader on multiple levels.
Yeah, it's definitely not a typical textbook.
No, it's not. Reading GMB is like having a conversation with a brilliant, slightly eccentric professor who's constantly challenging you to think in new ways.
Exactly. So let's dive into the book, starting from the beginning. One of the first things Hofstadter introduces is the concept of formal systems. Can you explain what those are and why they're so important to the overall themes of GAB?
Well, imagine a system with a set of symbols and rules for manipulating those symbols. Think of something like arithmetic, where you have numbers and operations like addition and multiplication.
Okay.
You can create all sorts of statements within that system, and you can use the rules to determine if those statements are true or false.
Right. And in GAB, Hofstadter starts with a really simple formal system called the MIU system. It has just 3 symbols, M, I, and U, and a few simple rules for how you can combine them.
Yeah.
It seems like a child's game, but it actually illustrates some profound points about the nature of formal systems and their limitations.
That's what I found so intriguing. He uses this seemingly trivial system to demonstrate how meaning can emerge from seemingly meaningless symbols.
Right.
It's like he's showing us how complexity can arise from simplicity, how order can emerge from chaos.
And that leads us to one of the central themes of the book, Gödel's incompleteness theorem. This theorem, in a nutshell, demonstrates that even in a seemingly complete and consistent formal system like arithmetic, there will always be true statements that cannot be proven within that system.
Whoa.
It's a mind-blowing idea that has profound implications for mathematics, logic, and even our understanding of the limits of knowledge itself.
I remember feeling a bit like the ground had shifted beneath me when I first encountered Gödel's theorem in GEB.
Oh, yeah.
It's like realizing that even in the most rigorous rule-based systems, there are these inherent cracks, these places where our ability to know for sure breaks down.
That's a great way to put it. And Hofstadter does a fantastic job of making this complex theorem accessible to readers who aren't mathematicians. He uses analogies, stories, and even visual representations to illustrate the core concepts.
Right. And then he connects this idea of incompleteness to other areas, like the nature of consciousness and the possibility of creating truly intelligent machines. It's like he's saying, look, even in mathematics, with its strict rules and logical precision, we run into these fundamental limits. So how much more complex and challenging is it to understand something as slippery and enigmatic as the human mind?
Exactly. And this is where the discussion of Escher's artwork comes into play. Hofstadter draws parallels between the paradoxes and visual illusions in Escher's work and the limitations of formal systems revealed by Gödel's theorem.
It's like those Escher staircases that seem to ascend and descend endlessly, or those impossible waterfalls that defy the laws of physics.
Right.
They create this sense of wonder and disorientation, forcing us to confront the limits of our perception and our ability to make sense of the world.
And that's what makes the connection to Gödel's theorem so powerful. Both Escher's art and Gödel's theorem are showing us that there are limits to what we can know and represent within any given system, whether it's a visual system, a logical system, or even the system of our own minds.
Yeah.
And just when you think you've got a handle on those ideas, Hofstadter throws another mind-bending concept into the mix. The idea of strange loops.
Strange loops.
Ah, yes, strange loops. This is where things start to get really meta.
Okay.
Essentially, a strange loop is a kind of self-referential feedback loop where a system refers back to itself in a way that creates a higher-level entity or property.
Okay, so
It's like those Escher drawings where hands are drawing hands, or those sentences that refer to themselves, like, this sentence is false.
Right.
They create these paradoxical loops that seem to twist back on themselves, defying our usual ways of thinking about cause and effect.
Yeah, okay, I get that. But how does that apply on like a larger scale?
Exactly. And Hofstadter argues that these strange loops are not just curiosities or intellectual puzzles. He suggests that they might be fundamental to the way our minds work, and even to the very nature of consciousness itself.
Oh, wow. So strange loops might actually explain consciousness.
That's one of the central questions that JB explores, and it's a question that's still being debated and investigated by philosophers, neuroscientists, and computer scientists today.
It's a pretty radical idea, but it makes you think, doesn't it?
Right.
What if consciousness isn't some mystical substance or property, but rather an emergent phenomenon that arises from these complex, self-referential loops of information processing in the brain?
That's right.
It's fascinating stuff, and we've only just scratched the surface of the first few chapters of GEB.
Yeah, we have.
There's still so much to unpack, including the role of music, the nature of meaning, and the possibility of artificial intelligence.
Indeed. But let's pause here for now and give our listeners a moment to digest all these incredible ideas. We'll pick up the conversation in the next part of our deep dive into this truly remarkable book.
Sounds good.
Welcome back to our exploration of Gödel, Escher, Bach.
Back again?
Before we paused, we were delving into the mind-bending world of strange loops and their possible connection to consciousness.
Yes, and it left me wondering how these abstract concepts from mathematics and logic relate to something as tangible and expressive as music.
That's where Bach comes in.
Okay.
Hofstadter argues that Bach's music, especially his fugues and canons, embodies the principles of recursion and self-reference in a way that's both beautiful and intellectually stimulating.
I can see that. When you listen to a fugue, it's like hearing a single theme being played out in multiple voices, overlapping and intertwining in these incredibly intricate patterns.
Right.
It's like a musical representation of a strange loop, where the music seems to refer back to itself, creating this sense of infinite depth and complexity.
Precisely. And Hofstadter analyzes specific pieces, like Bach's Little Harmonic Labyrinth, to demonstrate how these musical structures mirror the ideas of self-reference and recursion that he's exploring in the book.
That piece is a wild ride. It's like Bach is intentionally disorienting the listener, leading them through these unexpected twists and turns, playing with their sense of musical expectation. It's almost like a sonic representation of an Escher drawing, where you're never quite sure which way is up.
That's a great analogy, and it highlights how these ideas of recursion and self-reference aren't just abstract concepts confined to mathematics or logic.
Yeah.
They're woven into the very fabric of art and music, and they speak to something fundamental about the way our minds perceive and make sense of the world.
It's like these artists and composers are using their respective forms to explore the limits of representation, to show us how meaning can emerge from these playful manipulations of structure and form.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the question of meaning itself. One of the key insights of GEB is that meaning isn't something inherent in the world. It's not like objects come pre-labeled with their meaning attached.
Okay.
Rather, meaning is something that emerges from the interaction between our minds and the world, from the way we perceive and interpret information.
It's like those symbols in the MIU system, or those hyphens and letters in the PQ system.
Right.
They only started to make sense when we applied a certain interpretation to them, when we saw them as representing something else.
Precisely. And that act of interpretation, of assigning meaning to symbols and patterns, is fundamental to the way our minds work. It's how we make sense of the world, how we create stories and narratives that give our lives coherence and purpose.
But doesn't that also suggest that meaning is subjective, that there's no single correct interpretation of the world?
That's a great question, and it's something that Hofstadter grapples with throughout the book.
Yeah.
He acknowledges that there's a certain level of subjectivity to meaning, that our individual experiences and perspectives shape how we interpret the world.
So how do we avoid falling into complete relativism, where anything goes and there's no shared reality?
Well, Hofstadter argues that even though meaning is constructed, it's not arbitrary.
Right.
There are constraints on how we can interpret the world.
Okay.
Those constraints come from the structure of our brains, the nature of our sensory experiences, and the shared cultural frameworks that we inherit.
So it's like we're all playing this game of meaning making, but there are rules to the game, and those rules ensure a certain level of consistency and shared understanding.
Exactly. And those rules aren't fixed or absolute. They evolve over time as our knowledge and understanding grow, as we encounter new experiences and perspectives.
Okay.
But the fact that there are rules at all suggests that meaning isn't just a free-for-all. There's a kind of underlying order, a shared structure that allows us to communicate and make sense of the world together.
That's reassuring. But how does all of this relate to the idea of artificial intelligence, which is another big theme in GO? If meaning is something that emerges from the interaction between our minds and the world, can we ever create machines that truly understand meaning?
That's the million-dollar question. And it's something that Hofstadter explores in depth in the later chapters of the book.
Okay.
He delves into the history of artificial intelligence research, highlighting the successes and the challenges of trying to create machines that exhibit human-like intelligence.
One of the things that struck me about his discussion of AI is that he's not just focused on technical challenges.
Right.
He's also asking these deeper philosophical questions about what it means to be intelligent, to be conscious, to truly understand the world.
Absolutely. He's challenging us to think beyond the idea of AI as simply a matter of processing power or computational speed.
Right.
He's suggesting that true intelligence might involve something more than just following rules or crunching numbers.
Okay.
It might involve something akin to those slips he talks about, those moments of insight where we connect seemingly disparate ideas in a way that creates new meaning.
So it's not just about replicating the structure of the brain in silicon, but also about capturing those elusive qualities of creativity, intuition, and even consciousness that seem to be at the heart of human intelligence.
That's right. And while we may not have all the answers yet, GEB provides a framework for thinking about these questions, for understanding the complexities of intelligence and the challenges of creating truly intelligent machines.
It's amazing to think that a book written decades ago is still so relevant to the conversations we're having about technology and the future of humanity today.
It really is.
But there's one more piece of the GEB puzzle I want to explore: the connection to Zen Buddhism.
Okay.
It seems like a bit of a leap, but I'm curious to hear how Hofstadter brings these seemingly disparate worlds together.
Well, remember that one of the key themes of GEB is the idea of transcending the limitations, whether it's the limitations of formal systems, the limitations of our perception, or even the limitations of our language. And Zen Buddhism, with its emphasis on mindfulness, intuition, and the direct experience of reality, offers a different way of knowing, a way of accessing truths that lie beyond the reach of logic and language.
So it's like Zen is pointing to a kind of unmode of thinking, a way of seeing the world that's not bound by the usual categories and dualisms that our minds tend to impose.
Exactly. And Hofstadter suggests that there are parallels between the Zen idea of unmode and the limits of formal systems revealed by Gödel's theorem. Both point to the idea that there are truths or experiences that cannot be captured or expressed within any given system.
It's like those Zen koans, those paradoxical riddles that are designed to break down our usual ways of thinking.
Yes.
They force us to confront the limits of language and logic, to experience a kind of mental breakthrough where we glimpse something beyond those limitations.
That's a great way to put it. And just as a koan can lead to a shift in perspective, a kind of enlightenment experience, GEB encourages us to question our assumptions, to look for connections in unexpected places, and to embrace the mystery and wonder of the universe.
It's a powerful message. It makes me wonder, if we can cultivate more of this unmode thinking, might we be able to unlock new levels of creativity, insight, and understanding, not just in ourselves, but also in the machines we create?
That's a question worth pondering. And it speaks to the enduring legacy of Gödel, Escher, Bach. It's not just a book about mathematics, art, or music. It's a book about the human mind, about the nature of reality, and about the endless possibilities that emerge when we dare to think outside the box, or perhaps even outside the system altogether.
Welcome back to our final segment on Gödel, Escher, Bach.
It's been quite a journey through this book.
It really has. We've been exploring this intricate web of ideas that connect formal systems, art, music, Zen Buddhism, and even the nature of consciousness itself.
It's wild how it all ties together.
Yeah. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface, but I'm also amazed at how much ground we've covered.
Me too.
As we wrap up our deep dive into GEB, I'd love to hear your thoughts on some of the book's lasting applications. What do you think are some of the key takeaways that readers can apply to their own lives and their understanding of the world?
Well, one of the most powerful ideas in GEB is this notion that meaning is not something fixed or inherent in the world.
Right.
It's something we create through our interactions with the world, through our interpretations of symbols and patterns.
Right. It's like that famous passage where Hofstadter talks about the difference between an isomorphism and a homomorphism.
Oh, yeah.
He uses the analogy of a record player and a music box to illustrate how two systems can be structurally similar without necessarily preserving the same level of meaning.
That's a great example. The record player can play any record, preserving the full richness and complexity of the music, while the music box is limited to playing a single tune. It's a beautiful analogy for how different systems can represent information in different ways, and how those representations can shape our understanding of the world.
It makes you realize how much our perception is shaped by the tools and frameworks we use to make sense of things.
Exactly. And that's a really important takeaway from GB.
Yeah.
It encourages us to be more aware of the lenses through which we view the world, to be more critical of our own assumptions and interpretations.
So it's not just about accepting things at face value, but about digging deeper, looking for those underlying patterns and connections that might reveal a different level of meaning.
Precisely. And that's where the idea of slipping comes in.
Slipping.
Hofstadter uses this metaphor of slipping between different levels of meaning, between different frames of reference, to describe how we can break free from those rigid categories and see things in a new light.
It's like those moments when you suddenly understand a joke, or when you see a familiar object from a completely different perspective. Yeah. It's like your mind has shifted gears and you're able to grasp something that was previously hidden from view.
Exactly. And those slips are often where the most creative and insightful thinking happens.
Oh, wow.
They're the moments when we break free from the constraints of our usual ways of thinking and make those unexpected connections that lead to new discoveries and innovations.
So in a sense, GEB is encouraging us to be more playful with our thinking, to experiment with different perspectives, and to embrace the possibility of multiple interpretations.
Absolutely. It's about cultivating a sense of intellectual curiosity and wonder, and being open to the possibility that there's always more to learn, more to discover, more to understand.
And that's a pretty inspiring message, especially in a world that often seems to value speed and efficiency over depth and contemplation.
I agree.
GEB reminds us that it's okay to slow down, to get lost in the labyrinth of ideas, and to savor the joy of intellectual exploration.
I couldn't agree more. And while GEB is certainly a challenging book, it's also incredibly rewarding. It's a book that can change the way you think about the world, about yourself, and about the very nature of thought itself.
Well, on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into Gödel, Escher, Bach.
Wow, that went by fast.
It's been an incredible journey, and I hope our listeners will be inspired to explore this fascinating book for themselves.
And who knows, maybe it will spark some slips of their own, leading to new insights and discoveries.
Indeed. Thanks for joining us on this intellectual adventure. Until next time, keep those minds open and those strange loops flowing.